Okay, since these are dry, how about we go back and finish filling them? Okay, so this one, we could use yellow or orange, to be honest. I think because it looks like it's a yellow orange. So we'll go in with the orange and use that. Because these colors that you're putting next to each other, really, there are different colors. You don't have to worry so much about that definition that you would see in the flowers that we were doing, where we had to leave like a little white space here and there. Because the colors let the heart pop on its own. If I wanted, say, to add like a little more definition, or I should say shadow. So I'm going to use my small brush, grab a little bit of my red while it's still wet and add it to like the inner corner of where it hits the flower, if you want. And then I kind of also just lift it out a little bit because you don't want it too dark. And then I go and reapply some more orange. If you don't want that contrast, that's totally up to you. Helps like it pop a little bit or recede a little bit. Okay, so this heart under here is very dark. So that's where I'm going to use my deep red. And yes, it kind of went into the orange a little bit. But I don't mind that. If you really don't like that, then you just need to wait till that orange is completely dry. Same with this purple. So I'm going to come back in with my paper towel and try to lift a little bit of that red out. If yours didn't do that, then you don't have to worry about that. Okay. And then I can go in and apply a little bit more purple. I feel like that's the trickiest thing about wet on wet, is that sometimes things just bleed into each other that you maybe could have or should have waited. But if you don't and it happens, these are good examples of like what you can do. And I like to show you guys that because I feel like it's important to be like, okay, well, what if, because it's very common with beginners as well. Okay. There we go. This color down here is rose. So I'm going to grab some rose, and it's going to be less watered down because it is a little bit deeper, not as light as our flower edges here. Okay. Go up to the very edge of the orange. I think we have all of our hearts. Now it's time to work on time to work on our strawberries. So our strawberries are a mix of scarlet, which is that brighter red, and then the jewel red, which I kind of overlap part of it to create like a deeper tone. So like, for example, you can kind of see a little bit of the scarlet, and then the jewel is like this deeper area. And we might do some lifting, with our brush just to get some of that highlight if we need. And then the green is like a yellow and green mixture. So I mixed in, I'm sure from here. I mixed in my yellow deep with my permanent green here. And sometimes I also go in and mix in like that with emerald, just because I like to see like the difference, and you get more of like a limey green like with that. And it's kind of fun just to mess with like the different shades. But again, if you don't have the exact color, it's not a big deal, but just try to look for a mixture of green that is like has like a little brighter tone to it. Okay, so let's start with our strawberries. I'm going to start with my one at the top here. And really, it's like only a couple of brush strokes. So I'm going to start with my scarlet red. Make sure that it's not too dark. And fill like the whole thing almost. And notice how light. So I'm going to keep that edge on the right side a little bit lighter, applying less pigment. Then using my small brush, that way I don't have to keep cleaning my brush out. I'm going to add some of that jewel red, less watered down, and apply it to the left edge and let it bleed off to the right. Okay, so while that's moving, let's go to the next one. So again, scarlet red, or water it down, make it a little bit lighter. I'm gonna fill the whole thing. Sometimes, like if you want to add a highlight, like in the next one we do, I'll show you how to do that. Just leave a little bit of white space. And go back in with your jewel red or deep red along that left side. And the reason I picked the left side is because like for over here, you probably have more shadow. So it's less likely, this side's less likely to be covered by light, or by less likely to be covered. So there's more light hitting it. So it would be brighter. Okay. So let's go to this one. I'll show you using your scarlet or bright red. So I go like, if I'm adding a highlight, I kind of do something like this. And then I go in and I fill in the rest, leaving that little half moon shape there. Then going in with my jewel red over on the right side, letting it pull and kind of bleed into that scarlet red. And your highlights don't always have to be like in the same spots. Like I left a little piece right there, and that's fine too. I'm going to add it towards the bottom of this strawberry because it's kind of a little bit of it's underneath that flower. Okay. If you find that your first red layer is getting too dark, really go in and add some water to lighten it up. So I'm gonna make sure my painting's dry down here before I put my hand in it. And then layer in some of that scarlet red that's lighter, like that. Take my darker red and layer it in on the left side. And normally, like I would lift color out of this back one here, but because it is technically kind of like underneath this top one here, I'm okay with it being a little bit darker. But what I do want to do is, you notice how it's a little bit flat right there? I mean, it probably won't matter because I'm going to put a stem on it, so it'll cover it. But just for the sake of, hey, if I didn't, I'm going to round out the top a little bit. Oh, perfect. So that way you don't have that flat edge. And I know strawberries Some of them are really flat or can be, but I just wanted that one to look more rounded because my eye was going straight to it and I don't want that. Okay, let's go over to this one on the left. Add in my deep red. And let me show you if I wanted to lift some of that color out on the left side. So I got my brush and just with a little water, but because this already has water and before it dries, I'm going to absorb and keep rinsing it out in the cup, absorb some of that color, like lifting it out. And then, so that's another way, because like, you know how I use paper towels sometimes to lift color? This is the other way you can do it with the brush. So I do it both ways. I like to show you both ways, because sometimes you want just like a little subtle lift as opposed to just like a flat out lift. Just pull the color out with your brush. Okay, going back to our bright red. Okay, and then using your small brush to add a little bit of contrast along, I'm going to put it kind of along the right bottom edge. And then I'm going to do the same thing with my big brush and kind of go in and lift a little bit of that center color out. You're creating a variation in your layers, and this way you create some depth. And by doing that, I created a highlight off to the right side here, which I love because, again, on this side, there is going to be a little bit more light hitting it as opposed to this side. Okay. So this is our last strawberry. And then going with our small brush, again, just to create a little depth. I use a little bit more color there of the first layer, so it's a little bit deeper red, but I just wanted that like pure strawberry pigment look. And that's why it's good to kind of vary, so they don't all have to be, you know, like for example, this one is like partial, like looks lighter and then darker. And then this one down here is a little bit darker and this one's even darker. It's fun to have that variation. So let me just tell you about this line here. It's a little bit too hard of a line for me. So I'm going to take my brush just with some water and then kind of vibrate back and forth, pulling that color out a little bit. And then if I want to, I'll take a little paper towel and lift out the edge just to get rid of that hard line. And look how beautiful and smooth that is now. Just kind of softening some of these lines where the dark meets the light if I want more of a blend. Okay, so while that's drying, let's go and do the centers of our flowers. So for the centers, I used a yellow, and I use my small brush for this just so I have more control. And because everything's dry in the flower center, I don't have to worry about anything bleeding. So I'm really just gonna create an open circle around and leave that little white circle in the middle that you've drawn, or if you haven't drawn it, just leave a white circle in the middle. And make sure that the yellow is more pigmented, so make sure that it's less watered down. That way it can overlap and it's not too light. So then what I want to do is I want to grab some emerald green or that bright green. And I'm going to create like the stamen for the center, but still keeping that white center visible. And I create small lines kind of coming out. And again, this green is really not watered down too much at all. You want it to be just kind of straight from your palette, just so that it doesn't kind of bleed into that yellow as much. And you can go off into the pink, and that's fine. And then I like to create some little green dots on the edges, and they don't always line up, and that's fine. Okay, so with that next one as well, green lines, little green dots on the edges. You don't have to do too many lines, and you want them to have like a gap, that way the yellow still shows through. And whenever you feel like your brush is catching, add a little water, just a little bit, to get more of a flow. But leave that little bit of white space. Okay, so there we have our centers. Okay. Okay. So the strawberries, a lot of them are dry enough where I can go in and start creating the stems, or like the leaves on the stems, right? So I like to mix my yellow with, let's see. So we have our yellow, and I like to mix it a little bit with some green. So here's our green. Because I'm looking for like more limey green. Like this, I would say. And then I'm gonna go back in with more of this green here, just for contrast. So just to have like the variation will be nice. I'm gonna use my small brush. And for these, and I'll show you, I like to just really use thin lines and layer them on top of each other. And then what I would do is take a little bit of the darker green and kind of go over that in areas just for contrast. Because these are smaller and it's like a little bit, it's looser, you don't necessarily need, if we were doing like real strawberry leaves, it would be different, you know, they would be more defined, right? But we're just going to create our little sprouts for now. And if you want them more rounded, you could do that, where sometimes I do this. And then I go in and add like that. So we'll do a variety. But just know the most important thing is that you have two different colors and keep them loose. Okay, let's start with our like limey green. Okay, first layer. And I'm just gonna let that sit for a minute while I go to the next one. You can do like multiples at a time because you just want a little breathing room between the greens. That way that first green layer can have time to set for a second, okay? Okay. So let me go back with my darker green. You can kind of layer it in along the side, behind. Really, it's to add some contrast. And I like to do it while that other green is still wet, so that way you get a nice bleed. And you can overlap into the strawberry that you've created. That's fine. Okay. So just quick movements, layering. Let's keep going with the other one. So I got my limey green. And let's see, we have this one down here. Okay. And then see if this one's dry. And then if it's overlapping into a heart, you have to use a little more pigment. So a little bit more of the green, just so that it layers on top. And I know that's a little hard to see, but you can kind of, this green is layering on top of the purple. And once we add some of that darker green, it'll be more visible. Okay, so going back in with our darker green, let's add in a little contrast. Just be looser with the brush strokes. Okay. So you can notice how this one's a little lighter, and that's okay. Like I like, again, that variation. This one's a little darker. If I wanted to lighten that one up a little bit, I just go in with a little bit of water, kind of lift out some of that color. Because I'm just looking for where my eye doesn't go directly to one area. You want to look at the piece as a whole. So if you notice your eye is like really being pulled one place, that isn't really the focal point, then kind of adjust the color tones. Like it might just be too dark for the painting. If I take a little water, kind of soften the edges, that helps too. Lifting out a little bit of the color. Okay. So you have these wispy strawberries. How fun. Now you want to take some stems. I use my dark green for this to create the stems, really using the tip of your brush. I get really close to the heart for some of them, but don't necessarily touch it. So like, for example, I do that because when you're painting loose like this and you have so many elements, you want to make sure that your stems aren't connecting to something where it's not necessarily like it's coming out of it. So your eye can get like be misleading and be like, hey, it looks like this stem is actually connected to this heart, and you got to be careful about that. As you paint more, you can better decide what where those parts are. There we go. I like them a little darker because I do like them to, because they're so thin, I still want them to be noticeable. Okay, so while those are drying, let's go into our little box here. And I'm going to add yellow to these. That way, as I'm painting the words and the prickles and things like, or not the prickles, the little seeds on the strawberries, when I'm done with it, I can come back and do more of an outline on the box. So I'm going to add some yellow to my brush, really light, and just really loosely fill in these decorative elements. So just like the top and the bottom.